Jamaica 50, Constructing a Nation, was conceived of as a collaborative effort between multiple divisions, or among multiple divisions of the Institute of Jamaica. The main division, of course, in charge with mounting the exhibition was the Museum of History and Ethnography. But we worked with the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, and the Jamaica Music Museum, as well as the Natural History Museum of Jamaica, to kind of pull together the collection and to see how we would effectively represent the last 50 years of Jamaica's independence. Now, in our consultation meetings, we identified several key areas that we wanted to talk about, and more specifically, and really more importantly, we wanted to move away from the standard typical independence representation, which is the failure of the Federation, independence celebrations, gifts to the nation, that kind of thing, and kind of do a more expansive assessment of the last 50 years. So we identified 2 or 3 key areas that should be represented when we think about how Jamaica has developed and evolved in the last 50 years. The first one was a contribution of music to society. The second one was sports, which is just really very important, especially during independence celebrations in 2012. The last area was political violence. And when we thought of these areas, we started thinking about how do we represent these issues or areas, or very important areas in Jamaica's development, through an object or materially. And we were immediately confronted with the fact that the national collection that's housed at the Institute of Jamaica, and more specifically the historic and ethnographic collection, had not begun to think of, or hadn't been built in such a way to think of Jamaica in the last 50 years materially. Like, how would we represent political violence? Where in the collection have we effectively represented that? And, you know, we realized that we were kind of, in one sense, because you can navigate these issues through loans, but in one sense we were bound and kind of limited by, for example, the historic and ethnographic collection. The second issue was that as part of the national celebrations, we were already mounting a sports exhibit, and we had begun collecting for that. And so it would have been a conflict of interest to have a huge sports section in the Jamaica 50 exhibition, because in the Independence Village and so on, persons were going and seeing and interacting with objects from, sports and that kind of thing over the last 50 years. The third issue was that the Jamaica Music Museum had recently mounted its exhibition on reggae music and equal rights and justice. And so a lot of that exhibition already spoke to the, in some way to the development of music in Jamaica's history. So in terms of the actual historical and ethnographic collection and the Jamaica 50 exhibition, we had to rethink how we would represent the last 50 years, both bearing in mind the external external events taking place, and then using the collection to represent the last 50 years. And to do that, we did one section which everyone expects to interact with, and we really couldn't do away with it. And it's a very important part of the collection, which is the independence celebrations and the failure of the Federation. And what we did was that we used audiovisual sections looking at kind of summarizing the Federation, because we didn't want to spend too much time talking about the Federation and its collapse, and then doing the independence celebration itself. So there are these videos taken from the public domain, through open access, from the National Library of Jamaica, looking at these two elements: a Federation and its collapse with the independence conference in London in February of 1962, and then the actual independence celebrations. And we kind of tie up the section with the gifts to the nation, and talking about national heroes, national symbols, all these things that really were a part of the development of independence and nationhood in a post-colonial context. In the second section, we really decided that the natural history collection was absolutely important, and one of the things that we have to think about as a nation and as an island state is our ecology, our biodiversity, what makes, and these are things that make us extremely unique, especially Jamaica with its dry forests, Copy Country being one of the largest dry forests in the region, our biodiversity, the impact of invasive species, and the fact that there are specimens in the collection that have not been seen, they've been considered extinct since the late 19th century. And so it provided an interactive space for especially children when they come into the exhibition to see animals in various states of preservation, to see them there, not necessarily to touch them, but to kind of interact with them in that space. And the collection here is fairly extensive, and we selected dry specimens from the herbarium collected over the last 50 years, all of which were endemic to Jamaica, can't be found anywhere else in the world or in the region. And we placed them on the wall, kind of in a also equally interactive space, to kind of just suggest that there's just so much natural beauty that we have to appreciate and interact with in the island. The last section looks at the arts, both the visual and performing arts, and not necessarily performing in that we had a performance in the space, but what we did was list all the songs that won the National Song Festival since its inception in 1966. And when children and adults come into the space, there's a heritage of remembering these songs that were played and recounted during independence. And so the tours in that space actually include having children who remember songs that won the festival competition in the 1970s, that they can sing these songs because there's a rich heritage of recounting intangible heritage. And even though we weren't able to use an object in the way that we would have wanted to talk about these things, that putting that there on the wall actually made it easier, to tour the last 50 years and kind of made it accessible as through song. We didn't focus as heavily on issues of politics, and I think largely because over time we have to start thinking about politics materially. And one of the things that we found was actually really interesting was the use of cartoons in this process. But of course, in a historic and ethnographic space in which the object is most important, that these are things that we constantly navigate in museum spaces in developing countries, especially because in a country like Jamaica, the intangible heritage dominates over the material culture. And so these are things that we constantly thought about, of course, while mounting the exhibition itself. And it's an issue that we're just going to continue to confront as we evolve as a museum space. But we did select very important works of art to speak to not only our representations of Jamaica through the fine arts, but also to kind of show students the diversity, and adults as well, the diversity of representation through the visual arts. And in that last section, we then had another audiovisual cassette, DVD of different issues that we really couldn't represent. For example, the crime and violence, political violence, important sports figures, races where, key runners and sportsmen and women have set new records and won gold for Jamaica. The exhibition itself, though, starts and ends with two cartoons. One representing the kind of, and it's called Independence Stew, representing the kind of complexity and anticipation about the independence moment and its implications for how Jamaica could develop as a society. And the last cartoon, the cartoon that we end with, which is a cartoon that says, it's referring to Independence Day, and the child says, "Oh, it's just another holiday." And at the end of it, we wanted our audience to start thinking about, have we truly become independent? And in post-slavery, post-colonial, post-independence societies, it's a question that we must continue to ask ourselves, because we are locked in this large global world in which we don't have a lot of control over a lot of things that happen. And I wanted visitors to not only kind of relate to what they saw in the exhibition space, but to walk away thinking about how best can we improve Jamaica, how more can we, some persons who are more heritage oriented think about how best can we represent Jamaica, or how best do we represent the real issues that we have in society, not just materially, but just in our how we speak about our country and how we interact with each other. So has the exhibition been 100% successful? I think coming away from it, we have started to think a little bit more critically about how we represent Jamaica in the last 50 years materially, and more importantly, the areas in the collection that have to be improved, have to be expanded, and for that in the future we can then diversify the kinds of exhibition options that we provide and offer to the general public.